To make a glass chili pepper, I start by gathering some clear glass out of the furnace on a blowpipe. Most of the metal tools we use are stainless steel. The tube I have attached to the pipe is a pipe extender. I will use it later to blow air into the piece at the same time that I'm working on it with other tools. Next, I use a flat piece of metal called a marver to roll the glass. This smooths out the shape and cools the glass a little. Then I roll the glass in color powder for its first coat of cherry red. Immediately after adding color, I heat it to melt the color onto the clear glass. This is done in the glory hole, which is a furnace that has no glass in it. The main furnace must be left on all the time, but we only run the glory hole while we're working. The furnace stays at around 1100 degrees Celsius, or 1900 degrees Fahrenheit, and the glory hole runs about 100 degrees hotter. After the color has melted, for chili peppers, I marver the piece again and add a second coat of color, and then melt that onto the rest of the glass as well. Color is also actual glass. Different colors are made by combining different substances, usually metals. It's possible to add color directly to the glass in the furnace, but since we only have one furnace, we have to keep clear glass in it or we'd all have to use the same color. Now that I have a good coat of red on the piece, I sit down at the bench and begin blowing a bubble. As soon as I have a small bubble started, I begin to cut a ring called a jack line at the top, just past the end of the pipe. This is done with the jacks, which are another stainless steel tool. This is where I will eventually break the piece off the pipe. As I am working with it, I always have to rotate the piece, both to use the tools symmetrically and because the hot glass will droop downward otherwise. I also have to reheat the glass whenever it cools down too much to work with. The next step is to use the diamond shears, which are named for the diamond-shaped hole between the blades. I use these to get a grip on the tip of the piece and pull it out into a pepper shape. I also blow a little more air into it during this process. This is one point where the piece should be made asymmetrically to get the pepper shape and to make it a little unique. After reinforcing the jack line and reheating, I sometimes rest sides of the pepper on the edge of the marver to add little dents, which I've seen on real chili peppers. The tip gets a bit mangled by the diamond shears where I use them to pull the pepper out, so I use the shears again to cut down the rest of the way, which cuts off a small piece and leaves a nicer tip on the pepper. Cutting the piece off the end sometimes leaves a small bare spot with no color, so after reheating, I dip just the tip of the pepper into the color again and reheat to melt the new glass on. At this point, I'm done blowing any more air into the pepper, so I toss the pipe extender aside to get it out of the way. After a few more reheats and getting the jack line down as narrow as possible, I flash the piece, which is giving it one last quick reheat to keep it from cracking. I use a butter knife to cool the jack line a little more, and I tap it to start tiny microfractures in the glass along the jack line. Glass will break at the coldest point, so this makes it break off the pipe exactly where I want. I position the pepper in a holder filled with high-temperature insulation, called fracks, and tap the pipe with a knife or file to break off the pepper. I then cover it with more fracks to keep it warm, and then I go to gather a bit of clear glass on a solid rod to make a hook, which also doubles as a stem for the pepper. I put the clear glass on the spot where I broke the pepper off, pull the rod up to get a thinner stem, and use wire cutters to clip off the stem and pull it around to make a loop. Sometimes, if I didn't get the stem looped around completely before it cooled, I use a blowtorch to remelt part of the stem so I can get it into the shape I want. As soon as the stem is cool enough, I cover the pepper with brax once more. I will use a long metal rod with a hook on the end to carry the pepper. I grab an insulated glove and briefly preheat the hook so it won't shock and break the pepper stem. Finally, I take the pepper to the annealer, which is like a big kiln that keeps the glass at 515 degrees Celsius. When we have filled the annealer with pieces, a computer controller lets it cool down gradually over 24 to 48 hours. Otherwise, if we left pieces out at room temperature for more than a few minutes, most would crack and shatter from the stress. So it is usually a couple days before we can hold the finished chili pepper.